It was supposed to be a routine recovery mission. In the summer of 1982, Jack Brady, then a rescue diver working under contract, was called to assist in retrieving a body discovered off the coast of the Bahamas. According to the report, it was just another poor soul who had been executed by smugglers and dumped at sea, his legs shackled with cement blocks. Jack had done dives like this before. Grisly, yes, but never anything beyond the ordinary. The water that day was strangely cold. Jack would later swear it felt unnatural, like he had plunged into a different ocean altogether. Visibility was poor. The deeper he descended, the more he realized something was missing. There were no fish, no crabs, not even a drifting jellyfish. The sea was empty, silent, as if it had been abandoned. Then he saw the body. It was a man, mid-30s, suspended in the green-blue haze, swaying gently in the current. The concrete block anchored him to the seafloor, strands of seaweed curling around his arms. But it wasn't the scene that froze Jack in place. It was the man's face. The corpse's eyes were open, not milky, not clouded with death, but deep and black, like holes tunneling into an endless void. His mouth hung wide, not slack, but impossibly stretched, gaping into darkness. Jack described it as a doorway to nothing. The thing moved. Slowly its hand reached out. The fingers curled as if grasping for him. Jack panicked, kicked backward, and almost dropped his light. Another diver was nearby. He later reported seeing the same thing before his regulator was ripped from his mouth by an unseen force. The man barely survived. When they resurfaced, Jack tried to explain what he had witnessed. His superiors dismissed it, and within hours, a government vessel arrived. The body was taken away, sealed in a container, never to be spoken of again. Jack never forgot those eyes, that cavernous mouth. He would tell me later, in a shaking voice, that wasn't a man anymore. That was something else, something alive at the bottom of the sea. After the Bahamas incident, Jack Brady thought he could leave it behind. But a man doesn't simply walk away from the abyss once it stared back at him. Word of what he'd witnessed traveled quietly through channels he didn't even know existed. Weeks later, he was approached by two men in dark suits, the kind who didn't offer names. They only asked questions about the body, about the eyes, about the impossible movement he claimed to see. Jack gave them as little as he could. A month after that, a letter arrived. Official-looking, stamped with an insignia Jack didn't recognize, a black circle with a downward-pointing trident. The header read, Oceanic Surveillance Unit, OSU for short. A joint task force, they said, but Jack quickly realized it wasn't like any government branch he knew. Their mission was clear but unsettling, to monitor, contain, and when necessary, eliminate threats originating from the ocean depths. Jack had stumbled into their world by accident, and the OSU wasn't in the business of letting witnesses roam free. He had two choices, sign on or disappear. Jack signed. The OSU was a nightmare masquerading as bureaucracy. Its members were specialists, divers, scientists, naval officers, even linguists and historians. Their files stretched back decades, possibly longer. Jack saw grainy photographs of impossible things. Shapes moving in the Challenger Deep, sonar images of cities buried beneath miles of salt water, testimonies of sailors driven mad by voices rising from the sea. The Bahamas incident wasn't unique, not even close. Jack was trained, sworn to secrecy, and put on operations that never officially existed. He learned that many unexplained maritime disasters, ships vanishing without distress calls, oil rigs abandoned overnight, entire crews found drowned in calm waters, were quietly logged under the OSU's classified archive. Each incident was linked by recurring sign: shadows with burning eyes, sudden water temperature shifts, and voices speaking in long-dead languages. The deeper he went into OSU work, the more Jack realized the unit's true function. They weren't just investigators, they were gatekeepers. The ocean, vast and ancient, was not empty. Something lived in its depths, something older than mankind, something waiting. And every so often, cracks opened. The OSU was tasked with sealing them shut before the rest of the world noticed. But not everyone in the OSU agreed on what should be done. Some wanted to study, others to exploit. Jack, still haunted by the eyes of the drowned man in the Bahamas, wanted only to survive. He once told me in a low voice, "The ocean isn't just water. It's a prison, and we're the guards whether we like it or not." By 1988, Jack Brady had been with the OSU for 6 years. He had seen more than most men could endure. Creatures glimpsed through murky sonar scans, impossible shadows moving just beyond the range of light, and the aftermath of attacks that could never be reported to the public. But nothing unsettled him quite like the Endless Swimmer. The case began with a series of strange maritime reports near the Florida Straits. Multiple vessels had filed near-identical sightings, a lone swimmer, far out in open waters, keeping pace with ships for hours. Impossible distances, impossible endurance. Some captains described him as a man in his late 20s, others as older, but all agreed on one detail. His eyes glowed faintly, even in daylight. The OSU dispatched Jack and his team to investigate. They boarded a Coast Guard cutter under the cover of routine patrol. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Then, just before dawn on the 4th day, the call came from the watchtower. "We've got movement off the starboard side." Jack rushed up in time to see it. At first, it looked like a man, just an ordinary swimmer cutting through the waves with steady strokes. But they were 10 miles from the nearest land, and the water was frigid. The swimmer showed no sign of exhaustion, no shivering, no distress. Hours passed. The figure never slowed, never faltered. When the ship accelerated, so did the swimmer, keeping pace with mechanical precision. Crewmen grew uneasy. One swore he heard faint singing beneath the churn of the waves, a melody that didn't belong to any human throat. At nightfall, floodlights were trained on the water. That's when Jack saw it clearly. The swimmer's skin was pale, almost translucent, like the belly of a deep-sea fish. His face was eerily calm, but his mouth stretched wider with each stroke, as if preparing to swallow the sea itself. When they tried to approach in a smaller craft, the figure dove. Sonar picked him up, moving faster than any human could swim, circling the cutter in wide arcs. The temperature gauges spiked. One of the engines failed, and then, silence. The swimmer was gone. Officially, the report labeled it an unidentified marine phenomenon. But off-record, Jack told me something else. It wasn't a man. It wasn't even close. Whatever it was, it wanted us to know we weren't alone out there, and it wanted us afraid. The Endless Swimmer was never captured. Sightings continued for years, whispered among sailors. Always the same story. Eyes glowing, strokes steady, never stopping. Endless. By 1996, Jack Brady had become one of the OSU's most seasoned divers, though each mission carved away a piece of him. His hair had gone gray before its time. His eyes carried a permanent shadow, and his voice carried the weight of secrets that no man should have to hold. That year, he was assigned to what would become one of the OSU's most closely guarded operations, the exploration of Lemuria. For decades, whispers of a sunken continent had circulated among fringe historians and conspiracy theorists. Most dismissed it as myth, an Atlantean fairy tale. But the OSU had something the public didn't: satellite scans showing geometric structures buried thousands of feet beneath the Pacific. Perfectly square foundations, walls too straight to be natural, corridors stretching for miles. The mission was simple on paper: survey, photograph, and confirm. But Jack knew better. Nothing the OSU sends you to see, he once told me, is ever simple. The dive team descended into a blackness so complete it felt like entering a tomb. As their lights cut through the water, ruins emerged. Massive stone pillars, broken archways, and what looked like staircases carved directly into the seafloor. It was unmistakably artificial. The deeper they swam, the stranger it became. Symbols were etched into the stone, spirals and jagged glyphs that pulsed faintly as if reacting to their presence. The water itself felt heavy, charged, like swimming through static electricity. One diver reported hearing whispers in his headset, though the channel was clear. At the center of the ruins lay a vast plaza. There, half buried in silt, was a statue unlike anything Jack had seen. A towering figure with elongated limbs, its face a mass of tendrils, eyes gouged out, or perhaps never carved at all. The longer Jack stared, the more he swore the stone moved, like it was breathing. Then the tremors began. The seafloor shifted beneath them, clouds of sediment rising like smoke. From the darkness, shapes emerged, tall, pale, and moving with deliberate grace. The team retreated, their instruments failing one by one. Jack caught only glimpses, hands too long, mouths that never opened yet seemed to hum with sound. They barely escaped with their lives. The OSU sealed the files. Officially, Lemuria remained a myth, but Jack knew better. He described it in his journal as not a city lost to time, but a prison built to hold something the world should never see again. By 2003, Jack Brady had seen enough to know that the ocean was not empty. It was watching. But nothing in his years with the OSU prepared him for the encounter they came to call simply the deep-sea creature. The mission began with an oil company's emergency call. A drilling rig positioned off the coast of Nova Scotia had gone silent. No distress signal, no crew communication, just silence. When the Coast Guard boarded the rig, they found it deserted. Meals half-eaten, coffee still warm, lights still on. Not a single man remained. The OSU deployed Jack and a specialized dive team to investigate the surrounding waters. Their descent took them into a canyon so deep it barely registered on standard charts. The water grew colder, heavier, the kind of cold that gnawed straight through the suit. The deeper they went, the more Jack felt as though they were trespassing. At 3,000 feet, their floodlights caught movement. At first, it seemed like a wall, an expanse of pale, ridged flesh that stretched far beyond their beams. Then the wall shifted, and Jack realized with mounting terror that it was no wall at all. It was a body. The creature was immense, easily larger than a submarine. Its skin was smooth and almost translucent, glowing faintly in patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. As they drifted closer, an eye rolled open. An eye the size of a car tire, unblinking, black with a faint red halo burning inside. The moment that eye fixed on them, every instrument failed. Lights flickered out, comms died, and the water pressure spiked as though the sea itself was trying to crush them. One diver panicked and bolted upward, his body imploding from the pressure change before he reached 30 feet. Jack and the others could only hover in frozen terror as the creature uncoiled. It had no clear shape, no beginning or end, tentacles, fins, and ridges that shifted as though its body was rewriting itself. For a heartbeat, Jack swore he saw human faces ripple across its skin, mouths opening in silent screams. And then it vanished. Not swam away, not drifted, but simply disappeared, leaving only turbulent currents in its wake. The OSU locked the file, marking it unrecoverable entity. The oil company's rig was later destroyed in a structural collapse, the official explanation for the vanished crew. But Jack knew better. He told me once, in a voice barely above a whisper, "It looked at me, not like prey, not like a threat. It looked at me the way a man might glance at an insect, aware, uninterested, but capable of crushing it at any second." After the encounter with the deep-sea creature, Jack Brady changed. On the surface, he remained the hardened OSU diver, efficient and reliable. But at night, when the lights were out and silence pressed in, something followed him into sleep. The nightmares began slowly. Dark dreams of drowning, of sinking endlessly through black water with no bottom in sight. He would wake gasping, clawing at the sheets as though they were tangling weeds dragging him down. But soon, the dreams grew sharper, more vivid, more real. In one dream, he stood again on the oil rig, surrounded by half-eaten meals and empty bunks. Only this time he wasn't alone. A figure lingered at the edge of the galley, dripping seawater, its skin pallid and stretched, its mouth opened, but no sound came, just a rush of salt water pouring across the floor. Another night, he dreamed of the Bahamas corpse from 1982. But instead of floating lifelessly, it climbed onto his bed, its black eyes staring down, its mouth yawning into that same endless void. Jack would jolt awake soaked in sweat, his ears filled with the faint echo of rushing waves. He tried to hide it from his colleagues, but the OSU noticed. They always noticed. When he finally confessed to a superior, they didn't laugh or dismiss him. They only asked, "What exactly are you seeing?" That was when Jack realized the nightmares weren't his alone. The OSU kept records, reams of them, on operatives plagued by residual contact phenomena, night terrors, shared dreams. In some cases, hallucinations bleeding into waking life. Survivors of deep-sea missions often reported the same images. Black eyes, cavernous mouths, whispers in dead languages. It was as if exposure to these entities left a permanent mark, something that rewired the human mind. Jack began to fear sleep more than death. He drank heavily, stayed awake for days at a time, but exhaustion always won. And when it did, the nightmares evolved. He started seeing things before they happened. A mission briefing replaying in his dream hours before it was delivered, a diver's accident unfolding exactly as he'd seen it the night before. The OSU doctors called it anticipatory projection. Jack called it a curse. One entry in his private journal chills me most. They're not dreams, they're memories, but not mine. I think I'm seeing through them. I think they want me to remember for them. From then on, Jack understood the truth. Once the ocean touched you, really touched you, it never let you go. In 1997, the world briefly learned of something it was never meant to know. A strange, powerful sound, so loud it was picked up by underwater microphones thousands of miles apart, rumbled through the Pacific. The public came to know it by a single name, the bloop. Scientists laughed it off as shifting ice, but Jack Brady, then working deep inside the OSU, knew the truth. The OSU had been tracking sounds like it for decades. They weren't random. They weren't ice. They were voices. Jack saw the classified spectrograms. Hidden in the low rumble were tonal structures, patterns resembling language. Not human, not even close, but deliberate. Some analysts swore they could hear syllables, as if something vast and ancient was speaking just beneath the range of human hearing. For years after the first bloop, faint variations surfaced across the globe. Sometimes near the Arctic, other times deep in the Indian Ocean. Always remote, always brief, and always followed by strange reports. Fishermen missing, cargo vessels vanishing without distress calls, sonar equipment failing as if swallowed by static. In 2002, Jack was present when the OSU captured a live recording during a dive in the South Pacific. Unlike the public bloop, this one wasn't a distant roar, it was close. The divers described it as a voice, a guttural resonance that seemed to vibrate through their bones. One man tore off his headset, bleeding from the ears, screaming that it was inside his head. He never dived again. Jack began to notice the connection to his nightmares. Sometimes, in the moments between sleep and waking, he would hear the sound, deep, impossibly vast, echoing through his skull. But worse than the sound was the message. He couldn't translate it, but he felt the intent. It was calling. The bloop resurfaced sporadically for 2 decades, each time more insistent, more structured. By 2018, analysts within the OSU whispered that it wasn't just noise, but communication directed at something or someone beneath the waves. Jack confided once, years later, what terrified him most. It wasn't that the bloop was a living thing calling from the deep. It was that something else, just as vast, might be answering back. In his journal, he wrote, "The ocean is talking. We've mistaken silence for peace, but silence was just waiting for us to listen. The Challenger Deep, the deepest point on Earth. By 2010, it had become both a proving ground and a graveyard. Countless probes had been sent down into that black void, most failing, a few returning with fractured footage or scrambled readings. But the OSU wanted more. They always wanted more. That year, Jack Brady was assigned to observe a joint mission between the OSU and a private oceanographic institute. Officially, it was an unmanned probe intended to map geological formations. In reality, it was bait. The OSU had detected something stirring in the trench, sonar anomalies, pressure spikes, and most disturbing of all, a faint echo of the bloop recorded thousands of miles away. The probe descended for nearly 7 hours before reaching the floor. Cameras transmitted images of an alien landscape, jagged cliffs, black silt shifting like smoke, fissures glowing faintly as though the earth itself bled light. For a time, it was silent. Then the instruments began to fail, one by one. The last clear footage showed movement. At first, it seemed like shadows, massive, undulating, slipping between ridges. Then an appendage the size of a tower swept across the camera, and the feed cut. Panic erupted topside. But the real horror came later. A secondary vessel, manned by a skeleton crew of researchers, had been stationed nearby. Their final transmission was a garbled scream, followed by a thunderous impact that registered across seismographs as far away as Guam. When a recovery team arrived days later, all that remained of the vessel was twisted metal drifting in silence. The official story was catastrophic equipment failure. But Jack knew better. He saw the classified data. The pressure at the bottom had dropped moments before the disaster, as if something vast displaced the ocean around it. Pressure doesn't drop at that depth, unless something alive, something colossal, moves. The OSU sealed the files, but whispers spread through the ranks. Some said they had awakened something that was never meant to be disturbed. Others believed it was only watching, curious, testing the limits of those who dared approach its domain. Jack's nightmares worsened after Challenger Deep. He wrote that he could hear the screams of the lost crew in his sleep, mingled with the low resonance of a voice too immense to belong to anything human. In his words, "The trench is not empty. It is an opening, and what waits there does not fear us. It waits for the day we open it wider." By 2012, Jack Brady was a shell of the man who first joined the OSU. His hands trembled even when dry. His sleep was fractured by visions, and his journals grew darker with every entry. Yet the OSU kept him on missions, because Jack had seen too much to walk away, and because he had a knack for surviving encounters no one else did. That year, the mission briefing was unlike any he had seen. It wasn't about sonar anomalies or missing vessels. It was about a discovery beneath the sands of the South Pacific, a structure buried deep, too geometrically precise to be natural. The locals had whispered about it for centuries, calling it the Black Pyramid. The OSU sent a combined team of divers, engineers, and linguists. Jack went along, though his gut told him nothing good would come from disturbing it. When they finally unearthed the pyramid's entrance, the walls were covered in carvings, jagged spirals, teeth, and figures kneeling before something too massive to fit the stone. The linguists tried to translate. The only word they agreed on was prison. Inside, the air was wrong. Even sealed underwater for untold centuries, the chambers stank of rot. Instruments failed almost immediately, compasses spinning uselessly. As the team advanced deeper, a sound began, low, guttural, like the growl of something dreaming. Then the seals broke. Nobody could explain how, perhaps a shift in the structure, perhaps simply time. But when the central chamber collapsed, the ocean rushed in, and with it, something else. Survivors described it differently. Some said it was a mass of shadow and teeth, others a shape that never held still, shifting with every blink. One diver swore he saw its face take the form of his dead mother before it tore him apart. Whatever it wasn't just physical, it carried itself into the mind. Jack felt it press against his thoughts, an oily presence that whispered promises in a language he somehow understood. They barely escaped. Half the team never resurfaced, their screams echoing through the comms until the channels went dead. The pyramid itself collapsed, sealing whatever had been released back into the deep. But Jack knew it hadn't ended. He felt it in his bones. In his final report, he wrote only one line before the OSU redacted it. "We didn't discover it. We freed it. And now it knows we're here." By 2014, Jack Brady had become a ghost inside the OSU. He still went on missions and still signed the reports, but his colleagues whispered that the man was already half gone. He spoke less, drank more, and stared for hours at nothing, as though he were listening to a sound no one else could hear. The nightmares had grown worse. He told one confidant that he no longer knew when he was awake. Sometimes he would walk into a briefing room only to see it filled with water, the faces of his superiors bloated and pale, mouths moving in silent commands. Other times he swore the walls of OSU headquarters pulsed like the gills of some vast creature. That summer, Jack was assigned to an Arctic operation. The OSU had detected anomalies beneath the ice shelf, strange sonar returns, unearthly harmonics traveling through the water. Officially, the mission was reconnaissance. Unofficially, it was to confirm whether something had migrated north. The team established a temporary base on the ice. Conditions were brutal. Endless nights, groaning winds, the sea cracking beneath their feet. Jack became restless. He spoke of hearing voices beneath the ice, singing, faint but insistent, like a choir rising from the black water. Most dismissed it as exhaustion, but some admitted they heard it too. On the third night, Jack vanished. His bunk was empty, his gear still in place. There were no footprints leading away from camp, no signs of struggle. Only the hole. A perfect circle in the ice, edges smooth as glass, as though melted from below. The sea beneath was pitch black, yet those who peered down swore they saw light flickering in the depths, as if something enormous had opened its eyes. The OSU conducted a search for weeks, but no trace of Jack was ever found. The official report listed him as lost to environmental hazards. Off the record, his colleagues said something else. Jack hadn't been taken. He had answered. Years later, fragments of his journal surfaced in the OSU archives, smuggled out by an anonymous hand. The final entry read, "The voice isn't in my head anymore. It's calling from beneath, and I can't ignore it. If I go to it, maybe it will stop. Maybe it will let the rest of you go." Jack Brady was never seen again, but some believe he isn't dead. They say he's still down there, walking beneath the ice, listening to the endless song of the sea. After Jack's disappearance, I assumed the trail had gone cold. He was gone, swallowed by the same abyss he had warned me about. But a year later, in 2016, something unexpected arrived in my inbox. The email had no subject line. The sender's name was a ghost, Jack Brady. At first, I thought it had to be a cruel trick, some hacker exploiting the address of a dead man. Yet, curiosity overruled caution. I clicked. Inside was a single hyperlink leading to a secure Dropbox folder. Against my better judgment, I followed it and froze. The folder contained hundreds of files, audio recordings, mission logs, grainy photographs, and official OSU reports. It was as if Jack had torn open the vault of secrets he had sworn to protect. The material was overwhelming. Some of it matched what Jack had already told me. Video stills of the three-headed beast, sonar scans of impossible structures, testimony from terrified crewmen. But other files revealed far darker truths. There were incident reports of oil rig workers vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only scorch marks on steel decks. Eyewitness accounts of fishermen dragged screaming into the waves by shadowy figures. Coast Guard logs describing human shapes walking calmly across the ocean floor. One file shook me more than all the others, the Nightmare Index. It was a classified study conducted within the OSU itself, cataloging the dreams of personnel exposed to the anomalous phenomena. Nightmares of drowning, of burning eyes in the dark, of voices whispering in unknown tongues. Patterns emerged across hundreds of subjects, identical imagery repeating again and again. The conclusion was chilling. The phenomena were not simply physical, they were psychological intrusions. The ocean wasn't just filled with monsters, it was inside people's minds. Near the end of the folder, I found a series of corrupted audio clips. When I cleaned them up, my blood turned to ice. It was Jack's voice, tired, broken, whispering through static. "If you're hearing this, it means I failed. They're awake now, and they don't want the sea. They want us. Every nightmare feeds them. Every fear is a door. You have to resist. You have to." The recording cut off in a burst of garbled screams. I sat staring at my screen for hours, paralyzed by dread. Jack hadn't vanished into silence, he had left me the final proof. A warning, or perhaps a curse. Since that night, I haven't slept properly. The files sit on my hard drive like a living thing, whispering to be opened again. Sometimes, when the room is quiet, I swear I hear the sea, and beneath it, a voice. By the time I finished going through Jack's files, I was no longer the same man. Sleep had become a battlefield, my nights plagued with visions too vivid to dismiss as dreams. Even in daylight, I caught glimpses, shadows flickering across walls, shapes moving beneath the water whenever I walked near the shore. At first, I convinced myself it was stress. Anyone who had read what I had would feel shaken. But denial crumbled when the nightmares began to bleed into waking hours. I would sit at my desk, blinking at a document, only to realize the words had shifted into alien symbols, writhing as if alive. Once, I caught my reflection in the window and saw not my own tired face, but 6 burning red eyes staring back. The files had done something to me, or perhaps they had only unlocked what was already there. I tried reaching out to the few colleagues I trusted. Most dismissed me, politely or otherwise, but one, a retired OSU analyst, listened in silence before asking a single question. "Have the voices started yet?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He sighed heavily and warned me never to speak of this again, for my safety and theirs. His final words still ring in my ears. "Once they notice you, it's already too late." That same night, I dreamt of Jack. He stood on the deck of his missing yacht, rain lashing his face, eyes hollow and unblinking. His lips moved soundlessly until suddenly the words roared in my head. "Beware the nightmares. They are the doorway." I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, the echo of his warning pounding in my skull. From then on, I began noticing patterns. Reports of missing sailors spiking along the coasts, oil workers whispering of men made of shadows stalking the rigs at night, children drawing crude images of 3-headed beasts in seaside towns. All of it pointing to the same conclusion. Something ancient had been freed, and it was spreading. I wanted to walk away, to erase the files, to pretend none of it had ever touched me. But deep down, I knew Jack was right. Once you've seen the truth, it never lets you go. And so I'm writing this down, not for fame, not for sympathy, but as a warning. If you've felt them in your dreams, if you've seen eyes burning in the dark, know this, you've been marked. And the sea always comes to collect. I no longer know how much time has passed since I first opened Jack's files. Weeks, months, it blurs together. Sleep has abandoned me, and when it comes, it drags me back into the same drowning visions. Black water rising, cities crumbling beneath the waves, and a choir of voices chanting in languages I was never meant to understand. I've tried to destroy the evidence. I burned the hard drive, smashed the disks, deleted every copy. But the files return. Sometimes they reappear on my laptop in the dead of night, other times on devices I never connected. The photographs, the reports, the audio, they cling to me like barnacles on a sinking ship. Worse still, the voices have grown clearer. No longer whispers, but full sentences. Promises, warnings, demands. They tell me the sea is patient, that it has waited long before and can wait again. But it will not wait forever. Jack's last words come back to me each time. The nightmares are the doorway. I think I finally understand. The real threat was never the creatures lurking in the deep. It was the invitation carved into our minds. Every fear, every dream, every story told about them feeds the opening. And we are the ones holding it wide.